The Sherman tank lurches backward at full throttle through the French hedgerow, engine screaming in reverse as morning mist swirls around its tracks. Inside the cramped turret, Staff Sergeant Lafayette Pool squints through his periscope at the tree line 800 yards ahead, where he knows a German Panther is hiding. His crew thinks he's lost his mind. You don't drive backwards toward the enemy. You don't expose your thinner rear armor to tanks that can punch through 3 feet of steel. But Pool isn't thinking like a tanker. He's thinking like a Texas farm boy who spent his childhood backing tractors up to plows and driving cattle into pens. The Panther's commander is watching this insane American tank reversing across open ground and trying to understand what he's seeing. It doesn't make tactical sense. It violates every principle of armored warfare. Then Pool's gunner sees the Panther's turret traverse and screams, "Target! Panther! 11 o'clock!" Pool doesn't stop. He keeps reversing, and his hand is already on the turret control, spinning them onto target. The Sherman 76mm gun roars first. The Panther explodes in a fountain of flame and metal that lights up the entire hedgerow. 12 German tanks in 3 days. That's what a farm kid from Texas accomplished in August 1944, using tactics that made his superiors furious and made the Germans terrified. This is the story of War Daddy, the man who turned a Sherman into a Predator and rewrote American tank doctrine by driving like he was backing up his daddy's John Deere. Lafayette Green Pool was born in 1919 in Odom, Texas, a dusty farming town where the biggest excitement was watching cotton grow. His family didn't have money for luxuries or college or anything beyond keeping the farm running through Depression, years that broke most families. Young Lafayette, called War Daddy later, but just Pool back then, learned to drive when he was 8 years old because the farm needed every pair of hands it could get. His daddy put him behind the wheel of their Model T Ford truck and their John Deere tractor and told him one simple rule that would save his life 1,000 times over in France. You break it, you fix it, and we can't afford parts. So Pool learned machinery the hard way by keeping ancient equipment running with baling wire and prayer. He could hear when an engine was about to seize from oil starvation, could feel through the steering wheel when a transmission was grinding its gears down to metal shavings, and could back a fully loaded manure spreader through a barn door with inches to spare on either side. That last skill seemed useless at the time. It would end up being the difference between life and death in a French field 20 years later. By 1941, war was consuming Europe, and Pool could see it coming to America like a thunderstorm building on the horizon. He enlisted in the Army in June of 1941, 6 months before Pearl Harbor, because farm work was brutal, and the military offered 3 meals a day plus pay. The Army took one look at this skinny Texas farm kid and tried to make him a truck driver. Pool said no. He wanted tanks. Something about the idea of driving a 30-ton steel monster appealed to the part of him that had spent years wrestling ornery tractors through mud. He got his wish and was assigned to armored forces, learning to crew the M4 Sherman medium tank that would become both his home and his weapon. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The M4 Sherman was America's mass-produced answer to German armor, and it had a reputation problem. German tankers called it the Tommy Cooker because it brewed up, their slang for catastrophically burning when hit by their superior guns. The Sherman's 75mm gun couldn't penetrate a Panther's frontal armor at combat ranges. Its armor was just thick enough to stop machine gun fire and small caliber rounds, but offered little protection against the high-velocity guns the Germans mounted on everything. Statistically, it took 5 Shermans to reliably kill 1 German Panther, and 4 of those 5 Shermans would burn. But the Sherman had advantages that nobody talked about in the statistics. It was mechanically reliable where German tanks broke down constantly. It had a suspension system that could handle rough terrain at speed. It had a gun stabilizer that let it fire accurately while moving, something German tanks couldn't do. And most importantly, it had excellent visibility with periscopes and vision ports that gave the crew a much better view of the battlefield than the limited optics in German tanks. Poole looked at this metal coffin that everyone else feared and saw something different. He saw the tractor he'd grown up with, just bigger and with a cannon. His first combat came in June 1944, 2 weeks after D-Day, when his unit landed in Normandy and pushed into the nightmare landscape of the bocage hedgerow country. These were ancient earthen walls topped with thick vegetation that turned every field into a fortress and every road into a kill zone. German troops dug into these hedgerows could ambush American armor with impunity, and they were doing it with brutal efficiency. Poole's first encounter with a German tank was a Panzer IV that appeared from behind a hedgerow and fired, missing Poole's Sherman by 6 feet. Poole's gunner returned fire and missed. The German fired again, and the round punched through the Sherman's bow armor, killing the bow gunner instantly. Poole should have reversed, called for support, followed doctrine. Instead, he gunned the engine forward, smashed through the hedgerow in a shower of dirt and branches, and came out 15 yards from the Panzer's side armor. His gunner fired point-blank into the German tank's flank, and it exploded. Poole had just learned the first rule of Sherman tactics: speed and aggression beat armor, and firepower if you're willing to get close enough that the gun advantage doesn't matter. Over the next 2 months, Poole refined his philosophy into something his platoon leader called controlled insanity. He studied how German tanks fought and realized they followed predictable patterns. They'd position themselves at long range where their superior guns had the advantage. They'd wait for American tanks to advance across open ground. They'd pick off Shermans one by one from concealed positions. So, Poole did the opposite of what they expected. He used terrain for concealment and advanced as close as possible before exposing his tank. He memorized the sound of different German engines and could identify whether he was facing a Panther, Tiger, or Panzer IV just by listening. Most importantly, he discovered that German tank commanders expected American tanks to advance forward toward them because that's what doctrine taught and what made tactical sense. Nobody expected a Sherman to drive backward into combat, and that created a split second of confusion that Poole exploited ruthlessly. The reverse driving tactic emerged from pure necessity during a fight near St. Lo in July. Poole's Sherman crested a hill and found itself facing 2 Panthers at 400 yards, both with guns already trained on the hilltop. Advancing forward meant driving into their kill zone. Reversing down the hill meant exposing his thinner rear armor. Poole did both. He slammed the tank into reverse and backed down the hill at full speed, while simultaneously traversing his turret to keep his gun pointed at the enemy. The Panthers fired and missed because they were tracking for forward movement. Poole's gunner fired on the move, something the Sherman stabilizer made possible, and hit the lead Panther in the turret ring. It brewed up. The second Panther repositioned to fire, but Poole had already reversed into a sunken road and was gone. His crew was screaming at him about how you can't fight tanks backwards. Poole just smiled and said, "Worked, didn't it?" By August 1944, Poole commanded his own tank, a Sherman he named "In the Mood," after his favorite Glenn Miller song, and he developed tactics that were spreading through the entire battalion. August 8th brought the moment that would define his legend. His unit was advancing through open farmland near Mortagne when they encountered a reinforced German tank company, at least 12 panzers of mixed types, trying to hold a strategic crossroads. Standard American doctrine said call for air support, bring up tank destroyers, coordinate with infantry, attack with overwhelming force. Poole looked at the situation and saw a cattle drive. The Germans were positioned in a defensive arc, exactly like spooked cattle bunching up when threatened. He told his platoon to follow his lead and then did something that should have gotten him court-martialed. He charged, not forward, backward. Pool's Sherman reversed at maximum speed across 600 yards of open ground with its gun pointed at the German line. The enemy tankers saw this and hesitated because it didn't make sense. Why would a tank expose its weakest armor and drive backwards? Was it retreating? Was it bait? In those 3 seconds of confusion, Pool's gunner acquired the first target and fired. A Panzer IV exploded. Pool kept reversing, weaving slightly like he used to when backing a trailer through the barn, and the motion made German range estimation nearly impossible. They were calculating lead for a forward-moving target, and Pool was doing the opposite. Second shot, second kill. A Panther took a 76mm round through its side armor while its commander was still trying to understand the tactical situation. The German line broke not because Pool had superior equipment, but because he'd introduced chaos into their decision cycle, and they couldn't adapt fast enough. The 3-day battle that followed became legendary in 3rd Armored Division. Pool's tank destroyed 12 German panzers using combinations of reverse driving, hull-down positioning, and aggressive close-range maneuvers that violated every page of the field manual. He'd reverse up hills to get hull-down positions where only his turret was exposed. He'd drive backward around buildings to keep his frontal armor toward threats while maneuvering. He'd even reverse through hedgerows backwards, using his engine deck to smash through vegetation while his gun stayed on target. German after-action reports from this period note unorthodox American tank tactics employing reverse movement, and describe how it disrupted their engagement protocols. They'd trained to fight tanks that came at them. They had no doctrine for tanks that came at them backwards. Pool's success wasn't just the reverse driving trick. It was farm kid mechanical intuition applied to armored warfare. He could hear a transmission straining and shift before it grenaded. He could feel track tension through the controls and know when they were about to throw a track. He understood weight distribution from years moving hay bales and knew exactly how much his Sherman could handle before bogging down in mud. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. By September 1944, Pool had destroyed 258 enemy vehicles, a number that included 12 tanks in those 3 August days, but also armored cars, half-tracks, trucks, and self-propelled guns. He'd survived being shot at over 1,000 times, had his tank hit by German rounds 21 times, and lost 3 different Shermans to enemy fire while walking away from each. His crew worshipped him because his crazy tactics kept them alive, when statistically they should have died 5 times over. His superiors didn't know whether to decorate him or court-martial him because he won battles while completely ignoring approved tactics. Then came September 15, 1944, near a town called Stolberg in Germany. Pool's unit was advancing through a forest when German anti-tank guns opened fire from concealment. The first round hit Pool's Sherman in the turret, and white-hot metal fragments filled the crew compartment. Pool took shrapnel through both legs and his shoulder. His gunner was killed instantly. His loader lost an arm. Pool stayed conscious long enough to back the burning Sherman into cover, saving his surviving crew before passing out from blood loss. He woke up in a field hospital, missing most of his right leg below the knee and with his left leg mangled beyond saving. The doctors wanted to amputate both. Pool refused to let them take the left until gangrene forced their hand weeks later. His war was over at age 25. The farm kid who turned a Sherman into a weapon of terror through nothing but tractor driving skills and cattle herding instincts would never walk without crutches again. The Army promoted him to 2nd lieutenant while he was recovering and awarded him the Distinguished Service Cross. The citation mentioned his extraordinary heroism, and unorthodox tactical innovations. Pool just wanted to go home to Texas. He did, in early 1945, and spent the rest of his life quietly running a small ranch and never talking much about the war. He died in 1991 at age 72, largely forgotten, except by the men who'd served with him and the historians who studied American armored tactics. But his legacy lived on in ways he never knew. The reverse-driving tactics became part of U.S. armor doctrine in the 1950s. Tank commanders learned to use reverse movement for hull-down positioning and tactical repositioning. The idea that a tank could fight while reversing became accepted practice, all because a Texas farm kid applied tractor driving skills to a Sherman tank and discovered that sometimes the best way forward is backward. Modern M1 Abrams tanks train specifically in reverse operations. They practice backing into firing positions, reversing to break contact, and fighting while moving backwards. The instructors teaching these tactics don't know they're teaching Pool's innovations. They just know it works. The National Armor and Cavalry Museum at Fort Moore has a restored Sherman tank, and docents sometimes tell the story of War Daddy Pool and his backwards driving tactics. Most visitors assume it's exaggerated. It isn't. The combat reports are clear. 12 German tanks in 3 days, most killed, while Pool's Sherman was in reverse. The real lesson isn't about tank tactics. It's about bringing unconventional skills to conventional problems. Pool succeeded because he didn't think like a tanker trained at Fort Knox. He thought like a farmer who'd spent his childhood wrestling machinery and livestock. When doctrine said advance forward, his farm experience said, sometimes you back the trailer in first. When tactics said, never expose your rear armor, his tractor driving instinct said, you can maneuver faster in reverse than the enemy expects. The crazy trick wasn't crazy. It was practical knowledge from a completely different context, applied to a problem everyone else approached the same way. 22 years old when he landed in France. 25 when he lost both legs. 258 enemy vehicles destroyed. 12 tanks in 3 days using tactics that shouldn't have worked, but did. The farm kid who became War Daddy and turned a Sherman tank into a Predator by driving it like his daddy's John Deere tractor.